up albums. Oh yeah, I did
Welcome to this behind-the-scenes edition of Carnivore Theology, the podcast that answers your questions and helps you grow from milk to meat, featuring Pastor Al.
Hello.
Applause. Woo! Some other guy named me, Chad W. Graham. And
Applause.
woo! Steve, the Invisible Man Bastion. To hear the full, unedited, better version of this, go to carnivoretheology.com later, but for now, you're hanging out with us live.
Hey. That was good. Well done. That's a lot better than what we usually do.
I tried not to totally blow it.
No, that was awesome. Yeah. I mean, Steve is clearly the master, but you are an underling par excellence. All right. So you're ready. Episode. Here we go. Well, welcome everybody. We are back in the reading cave, as we like to call it, where we've laid out the bearskin rugs, we've turned on the classical music, we've stoked the fire, and we are together again having what we'd like to call a little read-in. The cocoa has been set, but it's not nearly as good because Steve's not here. So we feel a little sad about that, but at the same time, it's okay because we've got some really good books. And so we thought we'd flip on the recorder and we'd have a little chat about what we're reading. Usually we don't let people into the cave. Usually we just like to spend our own time and hang out together. And as I told you last time, it usually is pretty chill. But we figured we'd let you in to see what we've been reading. So we're going to talk a bit about books today. So I hope you're a book person because that's what we're talking about. Chad, I see you've got your comfy PJs on, just like mine, us and our onesies working out together. So I just want to make it clear for all those listening to the audio, I am not, in fact, in a onesie like L. He is alone in that. No, we're not in the same onesie, Chad. That's weird. No, you've got your own onesie.
I'm wearing that, what's that sweater blanket called?
The one that makes you look like Hubert?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so what we're going to do, we're going to go through a few books. Steve's not here, so we're going to have a little chat about books, because that's what happens every time Steve leaves, is we do a, what are you reading lately?
But the trouble now is that there won't be any picture books, so.
No, I know. He's the guy that commands all the, like the comic books and the Dilbert and what's that little guy, the little fat guy?
Archie. I think he likes Archie.
Yeah, not anymore. Good gravy. They've ruined Archie.
What? How'd they ruin Archie?
They made a
Don't tell me. I didn't want to know.
No, they made a TV show about it where everybody's killing each other and having sex. It's awful. Like, it's just like awful. Yeah.
Riverside is no longer the same.
Bad. Yeah.
So instead of like eating cheeseburgers, does Jughead eat people or what?
Jughead he's a little psycho. I'm assuming he's the murderer. I haven't watched the show, but I've seen enough trailers to know that nobody keeps their clothes on. There's some bad stuff happening with teachers, and they try to solve murders. It's like a CW awful show that they've it's just terrible. I mean, granted,
some CW shows are pretty fun.
That being said, you've got the original, I don't know if you know this about the original Archie, but if you go through the main characters, they're actually based on the 7 deadly sins.
Really?
Did you know that? Yeah.
Gluttony, obviously. What's Archie? Laziness? Sloth?
No, Archie's lust.
Oh, lust. Okay.
Yeah.
Jughead's gluttony.
Yeah. Betty's envy.
Oh, yeah.
Veronica is pride.
Ah.
Right?
What about Reginald?
Moose is wrath. And
boy, this is how we should get started any discussion of literature and books. The deeper meaning of Archie comics.
Yeah, it's really important. This struck me a while back, and I went through them. I can't remember the last of the 7 deadly sins, but they're all in there, and they're the main characters of the thing. All right, I tell you what. Why don't we turn to actual good books? And we'll start with you because I'm a gracious and generous host, and because my hot chocolate is so good, I'm going to try to sit over here and finish it. So why don't you? What are you reading lately, Chad? We'll do a few together.
I'm reading a few different things, and so Al kind of suggested maybe something wouldn't be too inappropriate to talk about something that I'm doing in my school because it's kind of fun to hear about people's lives. So I brought one of my case books, this one in the realm of torts, which is basically when you sue people. And we were discussing one particular case. The name of the case is Donahue and Stevenson. It's a very famous landmark case from 1932. If I were to summarize it, it is basically summarized as this. A nice young lady went to meet her friend to get a root beer float. The friend purchased a root beer float for her. They sat down to have it together, and she took one serving of the root beer float and had eaten it, and then decided to refill it, and she poured her bottle again, and out of the bottle came what appeared to be a partly decomposed slug. She had that reaction. Apparently significant medical issues, got a doctor's note, and began a lawsuit. But there was a big trouble in the world in that day. You couldn't sue the person who had made the ginger beer. And the problem, it was ginger beer, I think. And the reason that you couldn't do that was because the purchaser had an implicit contract with the person from whom they purchased, but nobody else. And so that meant the friend who bought the float for her had a contract with the person at the little cafe. And the person at the cafe had a contract with the distributor, and the distributor had a contract with the person who made the ginger beer.
But the person who gave
the friend who had it had no relationship to anybody, and she couldn't do anything. So the courts created a new law called the law of negligence, and that's now the primary field in which people sue today in the modern world. That's how you get a justice when you have legitimate issues medically or employment things, and you can perhaps find some aid and help for that. Which brings up a really important topic. We live in kind of countries that practice common law, and in common law, most laws are customary laws in our history, typically rooted in Judeo-Christian values and traditional values of the society and culture, which are interpreted by judges, and so we call them judge-made laws. So you sometimes hear people freak out. What are the courts doing? They're making laws. Well, they've been doing that for the last 1,000 years. Don't be surprised. There are limits. There are ways that's supposed to be done, but that's a little fascination for you. So if you want to get into some fun law reading, grab a case book and read about people's private, horrible disasters in life and what happened to them. You want to understand a word in it? That's okay. Give me a call. I'll fill you in.
That's right. That's good.
Well, how about your first book, Al?
All right, my first, but that was good though. I mean, we have a voyeuristic society that really likes looking into other people's business. You know, we have Facebook that's dedicated to people sharing drama. This is like old school Facebook. That's all this is.
Oh, by the way, let me just back up for 1 second. Really important for anybody who's interested. Go onto YouTube and look up the Paisley Snail, Donahue and Stevenson. It's be spelled Donahue, then the letter V and Stevenson. The Paisley Snail. It's a great dramatic what do you call those things that about real life? Documentary about this case that changed the world.
Yeah, that's cool. Very cool. Yeah. And it's in Canada. Even better.
Well, no, it's in the UK, but yeah.
Okay.
In common law, we follow precedents, and most of our precedents has come from the US until 1947.
UK.
Our highest court was the Judicial Committee, the Privy Council in England. And then our Supreme Court started to take over. So basically anything from previously to, say, 1950, our higher precedences are from the UK.
That's rad. Okay, I'm looking forward to our face-to-face coffee at some point where you can, because it's really interesting listening to you talk about this stuff. Okay, my first book.
It's really interesting. Anyway, on to something good.
I like it. I do. I think it's great, and you make it sound good. You've got a really good because you're interested. You make me interested. All right, so my first book is a book.
Let me tell you about the interpretation of contracts. That'll have you salivating. Right. Sorry, your turn.
My first book is a book called Holiness by J.C. Ryle, which I just finished a little while ago. And I'll be honest with you, I read the abridged version, okay, which is abridged by a guy named Robert Backhouse. And it is an excellent book. Yeah, there it is, right?
It's the full version, though. I read the full version.
Like mine. Mine's got...
I actually wish I had the abridged version. I might have to...
You know what? I have the abridged version because you can get the abridged version for free on Kindle. You just go to and they'll give it to you. And I read at night when I couldn't have my light on. I'd read that. And I mean, it's good. It's just really long. But this is a very good abridged version. And I can't...
Oh, you mean this one, the unabridged, is free on Kindle?
Yeah, the unabridged is free on Kindle. Yeah.
Well, tell the story about how you found out it was the abridged version.
So yeah, basically I was about 10 chapters in and or so, and my wife told me to turn the light off, and so I went to try to find my place, and I started reading the version on my Kindle, and it's just so much longer. It's so much longer. The little percentage thing at the bottom didn't change. I kept hitting the button, and it never changed for the entire time I was reading. still stuck at like 56%. And so like, what is going on here? And this seems to be taking forever. So I went looking and I compared some of the chapters I'd read to the chapters that were on there. And yeah, they were 3-4 times longer. So all good stuff, I'm sure, but I'm really glad I had the abridged version. So just to give you a bit, let me sell you on it a bit. I cannot tell you how much I appreciated this book. It's a collection of old sermons by J.C. Ryle, written about 140 years ago, but it reads like it was written yesterday. It's one of those timeless books. Every chapter contains this nugget of truth about how God saves us and how we can respond with a holy life. It answers the questions about, if anybody's ever wondered about their personal responsibility regarding pursuing good works and pursuing personal holiness. Even though Jesus saved us utterly and saved us totally, what's our responsibility? This is answers that question. This is what we have to do, what our responsibilities are, and why it's important. I mean, he gets into sin and sanctification and spiritual warfare and eternity, and it all revolves around, all those topics revolve around Jesus as the object of our love and trust. So how does it tie to Jesus, and what's our responsibility? It's a great book. Highly recommend.
Yeah, and I appreciate that book too.
Let me read just a quick section of it. I love right at the beginning. Introduction.
What I'll look in mine now. What page is it on?
Page 17.
That won't work. Never mind.
True holiness, we surely ought to remember, does not consist merely of inward sensations and impressions. It is much more than tears and sighs and bodily excitement and a quickened pulse and a passionate feeling of attachment to our own favorite preachers and our own religious party and a readiness to quarrel with everyone who does not agree with us. It is something of the image of Christ, which can be seen and observed by others in our private life and habits and character and doings. It's and that's what this book is all about. How we can change and how we become more like Christ. Great book.
Yeah, that sounds like an excellent volume to get everyone reading the abridged version. I mean, Ryle's big version is good too, but to be honest, I read it and I remember struggling through it. It's little tiny print, it's a really long book. I don't want to discourage anyone from reading it, but if you could find a great abridged version, I'm a huge fan of those
for sure.
And they exist for Calvin's Institutes and some of the great pieces through history, and they'd be great to do. Yeah,
because I mean, you want to read these great books, and when you start reading them, you get hardcore, and you're like, I want to read the real one. But if you can't make it through, you give up, and you feel like you're just flipping pages. What was the point? Get an abridged version, enjoy the journey. Maybe go back and read the other one later.
We call that the L experience. One of the keys to reading a great book, by the way, is to realize that you don't need to read it all at once. I believe it's John Piper that was saying that if you can read 2 pages of a great book every day, within a year, you're going to be well through that book and into another book and into another book. And it's discipline. It is doable.
Well, and he's famous for admitting that he reads very slowly, and he's not a guy that chews through an entire library in a year. He'll read. He reads well, and he reads slow.
I've actually found it pretty interesting since that I've been at school. I probably put, outside of class times, I probably put about 3 hours of reading into my required readings.
Yeah.
And so I find that affects my ability to really get through other stuff. And so I've really been selective in picking things that I really find enjoyable or helpful to myself at the present time. And so the next thing what I'm going to talk about here is a book that I would heavily recommend. I think that anybody could get into it. It's not overly technical, but it's an introduction to the great heritage of the faith in Christianity. This is a book by Robert Louis Wilken called The Spirit of Early Christian Thought. I don't know if you ever heard of that or heard of him. It's a great author. He has a book I believe I recommended before, which I would just say I'm not going to talk about, but it's good again. The Christians as the early Romans saw them, and it's from documents from the first century Roman writers who were observing and discussing Christianity. This one is some of the shapers and framers of Christian thought. And just to give you the tiniest taste, one of my favorites is a chapter called Not My Will But Thine, which is about Jesus who prayed the famous prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane. Father, if you're willing, take this cup from me, but nevertheless, not my will, but thine be done. And Christians had a huge to-do about the nature of the will of Christ. Was this a human will that was being obedient to the Father so that he could represent us when he went to the cross? Or was this a divine will that couldn't possibly sin, couldn't really understand the struggles that we have? And if it wasn't one or the other, was it a mixed will, partly divine, partly human? And you could understand, if you think about it, how this could have some pretty big implications.
Oh, huge implications. It brought about, the argument between whether or not Jesus is God and Jesus is, how could Jesus save us, and the Gnosticism, and it just, it explodes into this huge amount of heresy. Yeah, it's huge. Important.
And so in here, he makes a point, speaking about, in each chapter, he speaks about kind of the main protagonist, or a couple of them typically, who really dealt early on with fighting over these doctrines. But he makes a point about how sometimes, and I think we hear this today, why do we fight over doctrine? Why can't we all just sing hymns and hold hands like the Coca-Cola commercial? If we could teach the church to sing in perfect harmony, I'm not going to sing anymore. Origen, the great theologian, says this: "It is hardly a charge against Christianity that some Christians disagree with other Christians. Differences, he points out, not just on small and trivial things, but about the most important matters, whereas any philosopher would recognize a mark of intellectual seriousness." And then to apply that, in the 4th century, disputes over the doctrine of the Trinity called forth 2 councils, the Council of Nicaea and the Council of Constantinople, 325 and 381 respectively. But the controversy over the person of Christ, and think about this, the controversy over the person of Christ commandeered the intellectual energies of Christian thinkers for several centuries and provoked the convocation of no fewer than 4 councils. The conflict exploded in the 5th century and didn't end really until the late 8th century at the Second Council of Nicaea.
Oh, I'm glad it ended. We're all done with that now. That's great.
Well, one of the things to remember is one of the great foolishnesses, and I'm going to put it in the strongest possible language, one of the great arrogances, one of the great foolishness, one of the stupidest things you'll ever see happen in the church today is that we're all excited about reinventing the wheel, and we think we're so smart. Mm-hmm. As he just said in there, the greatest minds, the greatest intellectual struggle of 400 years of collective wisdom poured into coming to an understanding of this doctrine that was biblical. And when everyone finally came to a consensus, they marked it down.
Okay, this is it, guys. We figured it out. Write it down. Put it in a creed.
Now we have somebody who picks up their NIV and reads for about 15 minutes and goes, "I think I've got something new about the life of Christ. Let's just toss that.
I've got a revelation."
I believe it's R.C. Sproul that says, if you ever come up with an interpretation that differs from the interpretation of everyone that's ever come before you in church history, you need to consider the possibility you're the one that's wrong.
Yeah. That's great. That's awesome.
Anyway, I won't spend any more time on that, but he gets into discussing some particular figures within that flow and what their lives were like. He gets into the human drama of what was going on in their lives, what kind of persecutions they faced, what kind of family upbringings they had, what kind of education they had.
So this isn't a collection of all of their writings. This is the story of them.
This is the story of them.
Oh, that sounds great.
Yeah. Now, of course, it references their writings.
Yeah, for sure.
But it's not a collection of writings. It's a collection about the people. And that's why I think it's so fascinating. I think it's great for anybody. I'm reading it as like a casual reading enjoyment book. Mm-hmm. It's just something I don't. I think about it, and it gives me a chance to really devotionally meditate. Just for example, from that idea. There's a whole section on Cyril of Alexandria, who was Athanasius's disciple. You might remember him from Nicaea and Trinity debates. If you don't worry about it. But one of the things he talks about is the way Christ pursues glory, the glory of God in suffering. And Cyril came to a theology of glory in suffering. And it really is just a wonderful build-up. This is what Cyril says in the heart of the matter. Christ's glory is found in his suffering. The perfect fulfillment of his glory and the fullness of his fame clearly lie in this, in his suffering for the life of the world and making a new way through his resurrection for the resurrection of all. And he just gets in there and says, this is a greater glory than the glory associated with his miracles. And he starts to prove that point. We always think, he turned water into wine. He raised Lazarus from the dead. He walked on water. This is glorious. Everyone saw all those signs and didn't believe in him. It says that. Although they saw all those signs, they did not believe in him. But you know what it is that changed the world? Was that he died and was resurrected. Mm-hmm. And through the power of his death and resurrection, hundreds of millions, perhaps billions, what are their followers listed in the world today, assuming all kinds of things, but whatever. The world has been transformed by his suffering. In fact, it is his suffering that makes his name glorious. All the other great leaders of the world we've forgotten about, but Jesus is still central, even in our post-Christian blah, blah, blah world.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So that's pretty cool. So anyway, recommend that book. It's just a great, fun thing to look at. I think it's really well written too. So.
All right. So Chad uses fun in a very different way than I use the word fun. So I'm going to talk about a fun book that's actually fun. Okay.
Wait. That is actually fun.
But yeah, the way that your teacher stands up at the front and she says, okay, we're going to learn about fractions today, but we're going to make it fun. Okay. So I'm going to be more like the gym teacher who says when we have fun and it.
Do you know how useful linear algebra is?
Okay, so my next book is a book
Why is he laughing?
My book is a book called Phantastes by George MacDonald. Okay, so why is this a big deal? This is the author. George MacDonald is the author that inspired C.S. Lewis to create the Chronicles of Narnia. He inspired Tolkien to create Middle-earth. You can see echoes of him as you read the book all the way through these fantasies, like the granddaddy of fantasy literature. G.K. Chesterton once said that George MacDonald, the book The Princess and the Goblin, was, he said, an influence on his very existence. So if you've read a book called The Great Divorce, which is by C.S. Lewis, then George MacDonald actually shows up as a guide, almost in a similar vein to Dante's guide that takes him through the idea that George MacDonald guides him through the afterlife, showing him these things. This is a real guy. It was an inspiration, basically like C.S. Lewis's muse, and he introduces him as a character. So this is fantasy literature, but it's also allegorical, similar to Chronicles of Narnia, where you see Aslan, and that's his Christ character, and you see all these different Christological or biblical stories told in a different way with a different spin. Very similar in Phantastes by George MacDonald, just like Narnia. So if you like Narnia Chronicles, you will really like this book. I highly recommend it.
Mark Twain was also friends with him.
Oh, was he? Okay, cool. So I don't want to give too much away. I want to read a bit, but I don't want to give too much away because it's such a wonderful journey and it takes a while. It's a longer read. It's a great journey. There's a part I'll remember for all time, which is the part with a shadow that follows the main character. He goes through this adventure and he dives through this doorway and a shadow attaches to him. And the shadow becomes a character throughout the book that ends up being a manifestation of addiction or sin or a draw towards sin, almost like the fleshly desires that it's just stuck to him and glued to him, and it does things in his story that just is truly amazing. I love the book. It's an amazing book. Highly recommend.
Yeah, a really fascinating thing. I enjoy him as well, and I certainly think he's worth reading. One thing to think about and remember, he was a very strong rejecter of the penal substitutionary atonement and a believer in universalism. So these are some significant theological things, but he's still worth reading. And what I find really fascinating about him, we talked about how he's influential for C.S. Lewis. His view of atonement is something called the Christus Victor theory. Don't worry about the details on that. But if you've read the Chronicles of Narnia and what happens with Aslan and the stone table, Lewis is actually reflecting the atonement theory that comes from MacDonald. So you can see how these influences go through the different books. Absolutely fascinating stuff and well worth engaging in.
Yep. Okay, what's your next one? We'll do one more each.
Oh, one more each. How about this?
You only brought two?
I told you I'm reading less. Well, no, I got this one. I got this one. I got this one. And then I got more school books. I think I won't do any more school books. Oh! I know which one I want to talk about. And again, this one is not directly one of my school books, but I think it's really worth reading. And I got this one on Kindle because it's a multi-volume, many thousands of pages, and probably many thousands of dollars. I don't know. But famous classic, William Blackstone's Commentaries on the Laws of England. Let me tell you a little bit of backstory about this. This is absolutely fascinating. When common law the system of law that we live under in the English world, whether you're in England, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the United States, all the rights and privileges you're used to, innocent until proven guilty, all the different things that we're familiar and accustomed with are rooted in the system called common law. I'm not going to give you a whole lecture on that, don't worry. There is another system, and that's the system of civil law. It's basically Roman law. It came through the Roman experiment with justice. And the Romans basically codified their stuff in the end of the day, primarily through the emperors and the emperor's dictates, and that became the law because the emperor said so. But it's also rooted in different traditions and histories in various places. So these are the two great competing legal systems in the world. Most of Europe is on the civil law, Quebec is on the civil law, and Louisiana, the state of Louisiana, is on the civil law. But everything else in the English world is in the common law. Well, civil law was revived during the Middle Ages. And it was particularly revived through the Roman Catholic Church as the Pope essentially brought in the elements of civil law, but rather than the emperor at the top, he was at the top. So, and, I don't know if any of you've ever studied this, but the Pope took on many of the titles that were once given to the Roman Empire.
Yep.
Pontifex Maximus, or the Pontiff, is the bridge between God and man. The Roman Emperor was that, and now he's the Pope, and these different things. And so he brought in the system of law. And so the priests and everyone responded to him, and the church canons were all modeled on Roman law. And so it was very popular amongst the priesthood. And who were the teachers in the universities? The priests. And so at the University of Paris and the University of Oxford and the University of Cambridge, we're talking about the 12th century, 13th century, these different times, 9th, 10th century, even as the monastic schools were kind of coming out. This is what they taught. And so civil law was taught, but regular people relied on the common law. So if you went before the justices of the peace in that day, whatever different fields they were, Baron so-and-so or Justice so-and-so or Sheriff so-and-so or the king himself, you were treated according to the customary or common law of the realm. But if you went to a university, you would study these great civil law texts. John Calvin studied and wrote commentaries on them. He was a constitutional law expert, a lawyer, just for fun to know that, throw that out there. But the universities, strangely enough, kept the civil law system all the way along, and they never taught the common law. And so the various kings decided, this is a big tragedy. We need lawyers and judges and politicians who actually understand our laws, because it's getting more complicated. The empire is beginning to grow. We need to have answers for people. And so they started the Inns of Courts and different places where lawyers would train. And that's why law schools traditionally have been separate from the major universities. And so you would go to law school to become a lawyer, but you would go to university and you would study a Bachelor of Civil Law as a BCL at say, Oxford. And as universities fought with the king wanted them to teach the law of the land, and they said, no, they're going to teach civil law, and they kept trying to push civil law in the nation, and the upper class kept trying to do that, and then the regular people kept fighting against that and preserving their liberties through the common law. Mm-hmm. So this was kind of a fun thing. In the 18th century, Blackstone came and said, well, this is dumb because all of the leading people, all the people are going to end up in the House of Lords. They all go to Oxford or Cambridge. And all of our leading scholars and thinkers and politicians go to Oxford or Cambridge. And then we send people to law school to become mechanical lawyers, but they don't understand the liberal arts and the philosophy. And so this is an imbalance and a problem. So he decided to teach the very first course at Oxford University on the common law. And so this book is the record of the lectures that he gave. They were designed for like first-year university students to get a sense of the common law. And so it's fun. It's still very readable today. It's really well written. And if you want to invest a few million hours into something fun, you can go ahead and do that. But okay, this is amazing.
Chad, what? Okay, I'm an average Joe. What am I going to learn from that?
Several things. You're going to learn where our laws came from. Mm-hmm. You're going to learn the heritage. That's important because people want to change certain laws today, and they say, let's get rid of this because we have this, it's the exact same thing I talk about theology. Let's reinvent the wheel. We have a new idea about what to do with this. This is good, modern thing. And then what the argument of common law has been, and what Blackstone will argue is, the reason these things have been accepted into law isn't because one king thought it was a good idea. It isn't because one philosopher thought it was a good idea. It's because he would be a Christian. He would speak within some theological terms, but he would say it is because it is within the universal consciousness of humanity that this is a moral right. All people have a God-given right to say life, liberty, and the freedom of person, to quote from our Constitution. And that is rooted in those beliefs. They would say, a king can say, I'm taking away your life. I'm taking away your liberty. I'm taking away your freedom of person. And the community would say, no, we all know that's wrong. Now, there's some laws you would come across and you wouldn't know. Why was this the consensus? Where
except the highfalutin university people that are so their minds are so open, their brains fell out.
Yeah. I don't like those university people. Terrible people. So anyway, Blackstone, of course, was a university people teaching at university. But I know exactly what you mean. Yeah. No, it's exactly what you mean. So learning that is a way that you can preserve your freedom. You can preserve your understanding of why our systems of laws are what they are and how they work. And awesome. It makes you able to engage in all the public debates we're having today about all the different legalization of marijuana, immigration laws, life issues. All these things are coming up today, and you want to have some way to have an understanding of how to think through those issues. I think that would be
what? Honestly, I find that fascinating. I mean, I don't know how many listeners out there are thinking, that's really cool, but I would love to hear a whole episode where Chad just teaches us on some of that stuff and the importance of the foundation of our biblical, moral, universal, foundational laws of the land and where that stuff all came from. That's great. I love it. All right. So
put it on the schedule.
Yeah, put it on the schedule. That's great. All right. So my last one is a little book called Church Membership. See, it's very tiny.
Oh, is that the Jonathan Leeman one?
Yeah, Jonathan Leeman. And it's just great. Okay, so if you're looking at church membership, you're wondering about church membership, this is a book by 9 Marks where it teaches you what it means to be a church member and why that's important. It's general enough to be read by all types of churches, many types of churches, not all.
I was going to say.
Yeah, but it's also very biblically specific regarding why church membership is so important. So it starts by explaining why people have a hard time with the concept of even getting involved with the church, let alone specifically becoming a member of it, why people kind of hold back on even just committing to a church. And then it explains what church membership is, why it's important. And then along the way, it gets into why commitment and openness and accountability are crucial, what that does for our spiritual lives. Then it gets into what it means to not just be a member, but what the standards of a member is, what it means to submit to a group of elders and leaders and to the church around you. And then at the end, there's a discussion of church discipline, what that looks like, what if you mess up, what that's supposed to look like. It's a great book for me as a pastor to read, but I'm going to use it all the time from now on to give to people who are curious about church membership, to say this is a really good biblical understanding of why church membership is important, why there is a biblical basis for why we have membership and why we have standards of faith and standards of conduct and what we believe and why we together have membership. And keep in mind, this is only in a book that's like a half-size book with only 140 pages. Really, really well done. These 9 Marks books are really good. This is the part where you respond and say, "Well done, Al. That's a nice book. I agree with you."
Let me just disagree with everything Al said. I like to say that each episode. I have to get that out at least one time. The funny thing is, when I say it, I almost inevitably mean I basically agree with Al, but I want to tweak a little thing in there. I don't think I've ever totally disagreed with Al.
No, it's good. Yeah, we got some consistent stuff. We always leave Steve behind. Yeah, disagrees with everything they say.
So in this case, I'm totally disagreeing with Al. That's I mean, it is a good book. It teaches you about membership and why it's important and all the biblical stuff. But what it doesn't do is teach you about the long history of the theology of membership. There.
That's exactly right. Yeah, exactly.
This book is actually a wonderful book, where it is the fruition. It's in a free church model, the kind of Baptistic model. The history, we used to have church membership by virtue of your birth in a Christian country. It didn't necessarily mean you're a believer. Sometimes the church recognized that, sometimes the church didn't recognize that. But by virtue of being born in England, you were a Christian. By virtue of being born in the Swiss canons, you were a Christian. By virtue of being Roman, you were a Christian, and so on. Now we're not living in that world. So this is a case where since probably about the 17th century, there's been a revisiting of what it means to be part of the church. And it goes back into the early centuries of the church, 1st century, 2nd century, and builds it out. So it's pretty cool. I think a book like that's really valuable as it thinks through some of those issues for us.
Super approachable, super easy to understand, very convicting, really good stuff. Okay, I got a couple honorable mentions that I'm going to throw out. Number one is The Hour That Changes Everything by Dick Eastman.
That's a good book. Yeah.
Chad is the one who introduced me to that. Man, everybody should read that book. So good. Revolutionize your prayer life. Second one is a book called If I Were God, I'd End All the Pain by a guy named John Dickson of a group called Matthias Media. I got it for free because I found a Kindle deal. It's only $5 on Kindle. That's a great job. Like, it's a very super duper short book, but just kind of answer the questions of the reason for humor and suffering and what's God doing? Why are we still suffering? Why hasn't God ended it all? I'm not going to give you the answer. You got to read the book. The very good books. The Hour That Changes Everything by Dick Eastman. If I Were God, I'd End All the Pain. Any honorable mentions, Chad?
You know what? I think I'm just going to rest my case.
Okay, so Chad, your honorable mention will be Tim Challies and his blog. Could you?
Oh, yeah. Tim Challies' blog is really good. Yeah. TimChallies.com. I've been actually I've been lazy the last few months, but typically I've been a fairly regular reader of Tim's blog. I can't remember how many years ago he originally came out, and he was a kind of a family page where he had like pictures and stories about family, and he ended up throwing up a few sort of book reviews and a couple of little things that he intended for his friends and family to look at. And through the magic of the internet, it kind of exploded. So it's been a pretty cool thing. I would say today it's the go-to place for book reviews, for quick theological overviews. You can search the archive, and it's a trustworthy, very helpful resource. Tim's a great guy. So TimChallies.com, www.timchallies.com.
Actually, it's www.challies.com.
Yeah. I haven't favored it. I don't actually type it in. www.challies.com.
The number one thing, like the best thing that everybody...
Challies, right?
Yeah. The number one best thing is his a la carte, which he goes around the whole internet, scours the internet for the best articles, the best book deals, and he just dumps it into one blog post. He's great. He's got.
To be fair, I have been reading the a la cartes. I just haven't read.
Well, you have to, right? So he's got some great articles about it. So if you're looking for, you're crazy if you're not subscribed to Challies.com. You're really crazy because it's a critical resource. And this guy, I mean, because of his blog, he's been invited to all kinds of conferences and stuff because he's so well thought of in the Reformed community. Very, very good. Very good guy. Okay. So Chad, I think we've got enough. The fire has burnt down to a small ember. My cocoa is empty and I kind of miss Steve, so we should probably go find him. So I think it's time for us to shut down our little cave here and maybe move on. What are you going to do?
I actually dumped my cocoa in the plant over here in the corner because it's just not right when Steve doesn't make it.
I know. It's terrible. I apologize. I did my best.
You're a failure of a human being.
Well, it's okay. I'm okay with a little bit of failure. I've resolved myself to that. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening, and we're gonna go. Close us out, Chad.
All right. Let me say it this way. In the words of William Ames, great Puritan theologian, theology is the doctrine or teaching of living to God. Carnivore Theology is a podcast that tries to show you the ways that Al, Steve, and I have learned to live to God. And we want to encourage you to grow in your faith, to connect with your local biblical church, and join us again next week, hopefully with all three of us being here.
I hope so. All right. Bye-bye, everybody.
See you later.
Hey, thanks for watching our Carnivore Theology recording of our podcast. Check out down below. See the subscribe button? Click on that if you haven't done it before. We'd love if you clicked like, commented on the video. That'd be awesome. Also, over here, check out our Facebook page, our Twitter page, and also, if you want to ask us a question, we'd love it when people use the SpeakPipe page, so leave us an audio question. Thank you again for watching, and keep your eyes on the cross.